Then we went on to understand what it is that Buddhism entails. What is Buddhism all about? On the contrary to common misconception, I propose to you that Buddhism is not about letting go. Most people think that Buddhism is about letting go. I propose to you that Buddhism is not about letting go, but rather it is about realization. If something is valuable to you, if something is really important to you, if you feel something is the source of your happiness, then I fail to see how it would be even possible to consider letting that go. So, for as long as someone believes that absolutely anything, be that a flower, a painting, a car, a precious item of jewelry, absolutely anything, is the source of their happiness, that their happiness depends on their being that particular object, on their being that particular event or happening or occurrence, then for as long as that is something they hold true, I don't expect for anyone to let go of that. Why would they? Ask yourself this question right now. Imagine you haven't listened to any of these talks, or take yourself back to when you first started to listen to these talks several weeks ago, and if you were unfamiliar with some of the principles that I have shared with you throughout these talks, if I had asked you, what are some of the things that make you happy? You'd have had no problem giving me a long list of things. And in there you would have had people, such as family, friends, loved ones, acquaintances, colleagues even. You might have had places that you'd like to go, places you like to visit, countries, cities, picturesque villages, bird watching, activities, canoeing, rock climbing, abseiling, sport, games, music, theatre, art, and so on. There would have been a long list of things which you would have put forward as things that make you happy. Am I right? It is obvious. Now, when you strongly hold the belief that it is those things that make you happy, on what grounds would you be willing to let go of them? To see them taken away from your life, to see them fall apart, to see them fall into a state of disrepair, to see them crumble down and be destroyed. Who would have the heart to watch something like that happen to them? See? It's pretty obvious. Buddhism cannot be about letting go, because that would only cause you pain, suffering, even more suffering than perhaps the suffering that it would bring you while it's in your presence. Take, for instance, a mother and her child. Well, we must admit that a mother who has a child is not always a happy mother. There are times in her life when her child would make her unhappy, make her cry even, or make her angry. You can't say any mother adores that. You can't say those are the peaks of her joyful time as a mother. No, but nonetheless, if you would attempt to take her child away from her, then that would cause a disaster. she would not be very happy. She would not allow you to do that. No mother would. And if you ask her why that would be, she'd say, well, that's because my child makes me happy. My happiness depends on my child being with me. So you see, to try and attempt to convince this mother that she should let go of her child is pointless, for as long as she believes that her happiness is the result of her child being with her. Take another example. Let's say someone likes watching football, cricket, tennis, badminton, soccer, whatever the case might be. There are some people who spend most of their life watching sport. That is their favorite pastime. In fact, for some of them, that is their full time. Now, to get them to stop doing that, let's say, for instance, a mother who's attempting to get her child who's glued to his TV away from it and to get him to do something more worthwhile may come across a problem like this. No matter how much you try and convince him, it's virtually impossible to take his mind off the TV, because that is what he enjoys. It is his passion. So to try and convince him that he should stop watching TV when he firmly believes, and this is not simply a fantasy, he firmly believes that watching TV or the sport that he enjoys on TV is the source of his happiness. It is virtually impossible for a mother, a parent, to get their child away from the TV. To try and do that would only cause heartache and various problems. So yet again, I would not be so keen to speak to a child, or even on the invitation of a parent, to speak to a child and propose to them to stop watching TV and go and do something more interesting or something more worthwhile with their lives. That would not be a very useful or productive approach from my perspective. Rather, I will talk to them about their favorite pastime. I will ask them to share with me details. I will ask them to question their own belief that it is watching TV or the sport that makes them happy. I will continue to ask them questions. I will get them to question themselves. And hopefully, at the end of that, they will come to realize that the belief that they held, that is, watching TV or watching football, soccer, cricket, whatever, the belief that it was that which brought them happiness is flawed. Once they understand this, I no longer need to invite them or manipulate them or encourage them or any other attempt of that nature to get them away from the TV set. Once they have realized, that happens automatically. They will do it themselves. And that is the way of Buddhist philosophy. So, that is why I said, Buddhism is not about letting go. Rather, it is about realization. And you see, there's nothing lost when you open your mind to realization. There's nothing you need to fear. For instance, let's say you are someone like that. Let's say you have a habit let's say you have an addiction. Let's say you simply can't stop or break free from something that you have been doing habitually over a period of time. Now again, this is a good moment for you to ask yourselves what that might be. Even as you listen to these talks, you can apply the principles that I share with you on the fly. So think of something like that. Now, it may be that you want to break free from it, whatever that habit might be. It may be that you want to break free from that addiction, be that binge drinking or binge watching TV or binge eating. Whatever that might be. Smoking, drugs, alcohol, right from the more common ones like that to the more uncommon things such as addicted to sightseeing, watching things, smelling, tasting, experiencing, the lot. All of these things are addictions when you consider it. The further you go, the further you analyze, the further you examine this, you begin to realize, actually, all of us are addicted to these 5 things: sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. Various combinations of them we refer to, such as watching TV, cheesecake, pizza, watching movies, playing sport, and so on. Because you can distill all of them down to sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. So really, our addictions are to those 5 things. Because these are the only things that our sense organs can ultimately receive from the outside world and feed our minds. So in any case, think about any such example, and if you want to break free from it, you may have tried numerous things, numerous practices to try and break free from them. But perhaps the one thing you may not have tried thus far is the approach that I have tried to share with you throughout these talks. And we will continue to talk about these things. That is, to realize. So for instance, if you are glued to your TV set and you want to break that habit, my suggestion to you is not to try and switch off the TV forcefully. I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm not saying you mustn't do that, but what I'm suggesting is an alternative. Instead of forcing yourself to not watch TV, my suggestion is to ask yourself why it is you watch TV so much. If, for instance, you want to break free from the habit of smoking, perhaps you have an addiction to that. It may be that you have tried all sorts of things. Joining a support group, maybe trying to think about something else when the urge arises, dissociating yourself from other smokers, and so on. And while all of them are helpful, perhaps the one thing you may not have considered, perhaps, is asking yourself, why is it that you smoke? If again, for instance, you want to break free from the addiction to, let's say, spending time on Facebook, on YouTube, social media, you may have tried and attempted several things to break free from that habit, But perhaps the one thing you didn't do is ask yourself why you do it in the first place. That's why I say, if ever you'd come to me with something like that, I'm not going to suggest to you switch that off immediately or become austere. Spend the life of an ascetic. Switch off your phone and give it to somebody else. Put it in a cupboard and lock it and throw the key into a well or something. I wouldn't suggest that. Instead, what I would suggest is, ask yourself the question, why is it you do it? Because ultimately your answer is going to be, it's because it makes me happy. For as long as you hold that belief that whatever you do makes you happy, it would be virtually impossible to break free from that. You can try and trick yourself, but it wouldn't last long. Most of the time, at least. So I think a more lasting approach is to ask yourself the question, why do you do it? And once you continue to ask yourself these questions, once you continue to analyze why you do the things you do as per the methods that I have shared and will continue to share with you through these talks, you will begin to realize that the happiness that you sought from such activities does not exist in them. So therefore, engaging in that activity, indulging in that sight, sound, smell, taste or touch is not truly that which gives you the happiness that you experience. But instead, you will begin to understand that it is simply pleasure that you achieve through relief from vexation. And that is where we continued our conversation. So as of late, we have been discussing the difference between pleasure and happiness. We want to achieve happiness which is unconditional, which does not depend on external factors, which cannot be taken away from us by any force of nature, by any person or any divine entity. That is the happiness that I'm sure you would like to achieve. A happiness that transcends any other kind of conditional happiness. But now we understand that the happiness that we experienced by engaging ourselves in the multitude of things that we have throughout our lives did not truly give us happiness. So instead we use a different word for that now, don't we? What is that? Indeed, pleasure. So now we see a distinction between happiness and pleasure. Where happiness is unconditional, pleasure is relief from vexation. In other words, it is conditional. So, for you to experience pleasure, you must have vexed yourself prior to that. It is only the relief from vexation that brings you pleasure. And we used various examples to understand this principle. If you can't remember many of them, I will share another one with you just now. Think about when you have a rash on your skin somewhere. Let's say on your arm. What do you do when you have a rash? Well, the obvious, isn't it? Feels itchy. So what do? You scratch. Why? Because it makes you feel good, doesn't it? That experience this joy, this, within air quotes, happiness that you feel when you scratch yourself, is that truly happiness? Or is it pleasure? Would you like to continue to experience that happiness throughout your life? Well, if the answer to that is yes, now we have a problem. Because you can only enjoy that pleasure for as long as you have a rash on your arm. Isn't that right? If you want to continue to experience that pleasure, you'll have to opt to keep your rash. But do you do that normally? Why do they have skin doctors then? Why do you go to your doctor and complain to your doctor about this rash on your body? And why do you ask for medication? Why do you apply creams and ointments to cure it? If that pleasure is truly worthwhile, you mustn't really be concerned about the rash, should you? You should want to keep it, shouldn't you? Because to enjoy that experience, to enjoy that feeling, that sensation, which you do when you scratch yourself, well, for that, you must keep your rash. You must ensure that the rash does not heal itself. Isn't that what you'd want to do? So, if when you scratch yourself, the rash on your body, it feels good, then would it not make sense to have a rash all over your body? Because if you had a rash all over your body, then you can just spend time scratching yourself all day long, and that would make you feel really good, wouldn't it? But do you do that? Of course not. Who in their sane mind would want that? Instead, what do you do? Instead, you go to your doctor. You get some treatment. You get some medicines and treat it to get rid of the rash. But now, when you get rid of the rash, you can no longer scratch yourself because there's no need to scratch a rash that does not exist. But now that you have treated your rash, you can't scratch, and therefore you don't experience the pleasure that you once did when you scratched it. Don't you agree with me on this? Of course you do. So what do you opt for? Keep the rash and keep scratching it just so I can experience the pleasure? Or do you treat it and get rid of it? But in doing so, you are no longer able to scratch it and experience the pleasure that you once did from scratching it. What do you opt for? The answer is pretty obvious. No one in their sane mind would want to keep the rash and keep scratching it. That would be nonsensical. Now you see, pleasure is relief from vexation. The same concept applies even in the mental realm. I gave you an example in the physical realm, something that concerns your body, but the same concept applies mentally. The pleasure that you feel from experiencing sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, experiencing events, associating people, doing things, going places, trying out stuff, all these things. If you experience any pleasure, that pleasure is relief from vexation. It's like a rash. When you scratch it, you feel good. But no one in their sane mind would want to keep that rash so that they can keep on scratching it. Instead, what you'd prefer to do is treat that rash and get rid of it once and for all. Good riddance, you might say. Why wouldn't you want to do the same where the mind is concerned?